The Pacific Ocean holds secrets, dark, cold, and impossibly deep. It swallows stories whole and refuses to give them back. But sometimes, just sometimes, it whispers fragments to shore, pieces of truth that drift across currents and wash up in places they were never meant to be. This is one of those stories, a story about two sisters who disappeared into blue water on a sunny afternoon in June 2004, and the single piece of evidence that surfaced 10 months later, 2,000 miles north, in a place neither sister had ever been. What happened between those 2 points remains one of the most haunting maritime mysteries in modern American history. June 17, 2004. The California coastline near Monterey Bay gleamed under perfect weather. Not a cloud interrupted the endless stretch of blue above. Temperature hovered at 72 degrees. Wind conditions measured calm. Visibility extended for miles. It was the kind of day that made people believe the ocean was friendly, safe. 23-year-old twins Kelsey and Morgan Hartwell had been planning this sailing trip for months. Both recent graduates from UC Santa Barbara, the sisters shared an apartment in Ventura and worked part-time jobs while figuring out their next steps. Kelsey waited tables at a seafood restaurant on the pier. Morgan taught swimming lessons at the YMCA. They were close in the way twins often are, finishing each other's sentences, communicating with glances, operating as a single unit split into two bodies. The boat they rented that morning was a 26-foot Catalina sloop named Driftwood, owned by a charter company operating out of Moss Landing Harbor. The rental agreement showed Morgan's signature in blue ink, dated and timed at 8:47 in the morning. The owner, a 60-year-old former Navy man named Walter Briggs, remembered the sisters clearly. He would later tell investigators that both women seemed experienced, confident, and properly equipped. They carried life jackets, a marine radio, flares, and enough food and water for a day trip. Morgan asked intelligent questions about weather patterns and current speeds. Kelsey joked about finally getting some sun after months of overcast skies. Nothing about their demeanor suggested fear or hesitation. Walter watched them motor out of the harbor at 9:15. The Driftwood's white sails caught wind beautifully as they cleared the breakwater. Morgan waved from the helm. Kelsey stood near the bow, face turned toward open water, hair whipping behind her in long blonde streams. Walter waved back. Then he turned to help his next customer, never imagining that wave would be the last time anyone saw the Hartwell twins alive. Or at least, the last time anyone would admit to seeing them. The first sign of trouble came not from the ocean, but from a phone call that never happened. The twins' mother, Patricia Hartwell, lived in Sacramento, 3 hours inland. She had spoken with Kelsey the night before the sailing trip. A casual conversation about weekend plans and whether the girls needed anything. Patricia reminded her daughters to check in after they returned to shore. Kelsey promised they would call by dinner time, 6 o'clock at the latest. 6 o'clock came and went. Patricia tried both cell phones. No answer. She left voicemails. She sent text messages. She told herself the girls probably lost track of time, maybe stopped for dinner somewhere along the coast, forgot to charge their phones. Young people did that. It was annoying but harmless. By 10 that night, annoying had transformed into concern. Patricia called the Ventura apartment. The phone rang and rang. No one picked up. She called again at 11, midnight, 1 in the morning. Each unanswered ring amplified the sick feeling spreading through her chest. At 2:30 in the morning on June 18th, Patricia Hartwell called the Monterey County Sheriff's Office to report her daughters missing. The deputy who took the call tried to be reassuring. Adults had the right to be unreachable. Maybe the sisters decided to stay overnight somewhere. Maybe they met friends. Maybe their phones died and they simply forgot to call home. He suggested waiting until morning. Patricia insisted something was wrong. A mother knows. The deputy filed the report. At dawn, he contacted the harbor master at Moss Landing. Walter Briggs arrived at his office to find law enforcement waiting. When asked about the Hartwell twins, his face went pale. The Driftwood had not returned. The slip sat empty. Rental period ended at 6 the previous evening. No one had called to extend it. The Coast Guard launched a search operation at 7:45 on the morning of June 18th. Helicopters lifted off from Air Station San Francisco. Cutters deployed from nearby ports. Search and rescue teams covered a grid pattern extending 50 nautical miles from Moss Landing Harbor, factoring in currents, wind drift, and possible routes the sisters might have taken. They found nothing. No boat, no debris, no distress signals had been received. The marine radio remained silent. It was as if the driftwood and everyone aboard had simply evaporated into salt air. On June 20th, 72 hours after the twins disappeared, a commercial fishing vessel named Pacific Dawn radioed the Coast Guard with a report. They had spotted debris approximately 38 miles northwest of Moss Landing. A Coast Guard cutter diverted to investigate. What they found sent the case in a direction no one expected. Floating among kelp beds and drifting foam, searchers recovered a white fiberglass section approximately 4 feet long. Paint matched the driftwood's hull. Forensic analysis would later confirm it came from the port side, near the stern. The edges showed impact damage. Something had struck the boat with significant force, but the damage pattern was wrong. Not consistent with rocks or collision with another vessel. The fiberglass had been punctured inward, as though something had rammed the boat from outside. Something with enough mass and velocity to punch through reinforced hull material designed to withstand rough seas. The Coast Guard expanded the search. Over the next 5 days, they recovered additional debris. A life jacket, uninflated and unused, with Kelsey's name written on the strap in permanent marker. A waterproof bag containing sunscreen, 2 towels, and a digital camera. The camera no longer functioned. Salt water had destroyed the electronics. Whatever images it held were gone forever. They never found the bodies. They never found the rest of the boat. They never found any evidence explaining what punctured the hull, or where the sisters went after their vessel was damaged. The official Coast Guard report, released in August 2004, concluded that the driftwood had suffered catastrophic structural failure due to unknown impact. The Hartwell sisters were presumed drowned. Cause of impact remained undetermined. The case was classified as a maritime accident with insufficient evidence for further investigation. Patricia Hartwell refused to accept that conclusion. She hired a private investigator, a former police detective named Raymond Vasquez, who specialized in cold cases. Raymond spent 3 months reviewing every detail. He interviewed Walter Briggs 8 times. He talked to other boaters who had been on the water that day. He studied weather reports, tide charts, and satellite imagery. The mystery might have faded into the background noise of tragic accidents that happen on the ocean every year. Families grieving, questions unanswered, time moving forward because it has no choice. Then, in April 2005, 10 months after the twins disappeared, everything changed. The suitcase washed ashore on a beach near Juneau, Alaska. The person who found it was a 14-year-old boy named Tyler Brennan, walking the shoreline after school looking for interesting shells and driftwood to sell to tourists. The beach sat remote, accessible only by boat or a long hike through dense forest. Most locals avoided it because the currents made swimming dangerous and the rocks made walking treacherous. Tyler almost missed the suitcase entirely. It had wedged between 2 large boulders near the high tide line, partially buried in sand and seaweed. Black, hard-sided, medium-sized, the kind of generic luggage sold in department stores across the country. Tyler pulled it free and tried the latches. Locked. Being 14 and curious, Tyler took the suitcase home. His father, a commercial fisherman named Dale Brennan, used bolt cutters to snap the locks. When they opened the case, they found it packed with clothes. Women's clothes, jeans, t-shirts, underwear, a fleece jacket. Everything smelled like mildew and ocean. But beneath the clothes, wrapped in multiple layers of plastic bags, was something that made Dale's hands stop moving. A Polaroid photograph. The image showed 2 young women on a boat. Blonde hair, sunglasses, identical faces. Both were smiling, arms around each other, blue sky and water visible behind them. On the white border beneath the image, someone had written a date in black ink. June 16, 2004, the day before the Hartwell twins disappeared. Dale Brennan called the Alaska State Troopers. They collected the suitcase, cataloged the contents, and began trying to identify the women in the photograph. It took less than 24 hours. A junior trooper named Angela Morrison recognized the date and description from a missing persons database she had recently updated. She pulled the Hartwell case file and compared the Polaroid to photographs provided by the family. The match was undeniable. Kelsey and Morgan Hartwell, alive and smiling, one day before they vanished. The Alaska State Troopers contacted Monterey County Sheriff's Office, who contacted the Coast Guard, who contacted Patricia Hartwell. She flew to Juneau 2 days later and positively identified the clothes as belonging to her daughters. The fleece jacket was Kelsey's, purchased the previous Christmas. The jeans were Morgan's favorite brand. Even the underwear matched items Patricia remembered folding and putting away during visits to their apartment, but none of it made sense. The Hartwell twins disappeared off the California coast. Why would their suitcase surface in Alaska, 2,000 miles away? The ocean currents didn't support that kind of drift pattern. Experts calculated that debris from Monterey Bay would take years to reach Alaska, not months. And even then it would likely end up on the Washington or Oregon coast first. Someone had transported that suitcase north. Someone who wanted it found. Or someone who thought the ocean would hide it forever, and got unlucky. The FBI entered the case in May 2005. What had been treated as a tragic boating accident now carried implications of foul play. Special Agent Veronica Lang, a veteran of maritime crime investigation, took the lead. She assembled a task force that included Coast Guard investigators, local law enforcement from California and Alaska, and forensic specialists. They started with the suitcase itself. Black, manufactured by American Tourister, model number indicating it was produced sometime between 2002 and 2004. Sold in hundreds of stores. No distinctive marks or damage that might indicate where it had been. The locks showed tool marks consistent with bolt cutters, but those marks were fresh, made by Dale Brennan when he opened it. Original locking mechanism showed no signs of forced entry or tampering. The clothes underwent extensive forensic analysis. No blood, no evidence of violence. Salt saturation indicated prolonged immersion in seawater, but the plastic bags had protected the Polaroid and kept some items relatively dry. DNA testing confirmed the clothes belonged to Kelsey and Morgan. Hair and skin cells matched samples taken from their apartment. The Polaroid became the center of attention. It was a genuine Polaroid photograph, not a digital print. The camera that took it would have been a Polaroid instant film model, likely a 600 series based on the image format. The film itself showed weathering consistent with exposure to moisture and temperature fluctuation, but the image remained clear enough for analysis. Forensic photo specialists enhanced the image. In the background, beyond the twins, they could make out details of the boat. White hull, wooden deck, rigging visible on the left edge. Everything matched the driftwood. More importantly, they identified something else. In the far background, barely visible on the horizon, was a dark shape. Another boat. Larger. The specialists estimated it to be at least 60 feet long, possibly a yacht or fishing vessel. Was that boat significant? Had it been near the driftwood when something happened? Or was it just a random vessel passing through busy waters where dozens of boats operated every day? Agent Lang tracked down everyone who had been on the water near Monterey Bay on June 17, 2004. She interviewed dozens of boat owners, charter captains, fishermen, and recreational sailors. No one remembered seeing the driftwood. No one reported unusual activity. No one had answers. She turned her attention to the twins' personal lives. Maybe the answer wasn't on the ocean. Maybe it started on land. Kelsey and Morgan Hartwell grew up in Sacramento, graduated high school with honors, attended UC Santa Barbara together. They shared friends, shared interests, shared everything. But as Agent Lang dug deeper, she discovered the twins were not quite as identical as they appeared. Morgan had recently started dating someone, a man named Eric Talmadge, 28 years old, who worked as a marine biologist at the Monterey Bay Aquarium. They had met in March 2004, when Morgan took a job leading school tours at the aquarium. Eric was quiet, intense, passionate about ocean conservation. Friends described him as awkward but sweet. Morgan seemed happy with him. Kelsey, on the other hand, had expressed concerns. She told her roommate, a woman named Brooke Sanderson, that she didn't trust Eric. Something about him felt off. He was too controlling, too interested in where Morgan went and who she talked to. Kelsey worried her sister was moving too fast with someone they barely knew. Agent Lang interviewed Eric Talmadge in June 2005. He lived alone in a small house near Cannery Row, walls covered with photographs of whales and dolphins. He seemed genuinely devastated by Morgan's disappearance. He cried during the interview. He said he loved her. He said they had been planning a trip together later that summer. He had nothing to do with what happened. When asked about his whereabouts on June 17, 2004, Eric provided a solid alibi. He had been at work all day, leading a research dive in the kelp forests off Point Lobos. 12 people confirmed his presence. Dive logs showed he had been underwater from 10 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon. Time-stamped photographs proved it. There was no way he could have been anywhere near the twins when they disappeared. Agent Lang pushed harder. She asked about the Polaroid. Did Eric own a Polaroid camera? He said no. Did he know who might have taken that photograph? He said no. Did he know anyone in Alaska? He said no. Every question led to dead ends. The investigation ground forward through summer 2005, with frustrating slowness. The FBI expanded their search, looking for connections between California and Alaska. They examined flight manifests, ferry passenger lists, shipping records. They looked for anyone who might have transported a suitcase north. They found nothing. In August, a break came from an unexpected source. A woman named Helen Ortega, who worked as a motel clerk in Crescent City, California, near the Oregon border, called the FBI tip line. She had seen the news coverage about the Hartwell twins and the mysterious suitcase. Something had been bothering her for months. She needed to tell someone. On June 18, 2004, the day after the twins disappeared, a man had checked into the seaside motel where Helen worked. He arrived around midnight, which was unusual. Most guests checked in during daylight hours. He paid cash for 2 nights. He gave a fake name. She was certain of it now, though she couldn't remember what name he had used. He looked exhausted, nervous. He carried 2 pieces of luggage. One was a black, hard-sided suitcase. Helen remembered him because of the way he acted. He barely made eye contact. He kept looking out the window like he expected someone to follow him. He asked if the room had a back exit. When Helen asked if everything was okay, he said he was fine, just tired from driving. But his hands shook when he signed the registration card. She never saw him check out. On the morning of June 20th, she found his room empty. Bed made. No trace he had ever been there. The black suitcase was gone. So was the man. Helen had thought about calling the police at the time, but she talked herself out of it. Motels attracted odd people. It probably meant nothing. But now, seeing that black suitcase on the news, seeing those poor girls' faces, she couldn't stop thinking about it. What if that man had something to do with their disappearance? What if she could have stopped whatever happened? Agent Lang drove to Crescent City the next day. Helen walked her through everything she remembered. The motel kept registration cards, but the card from June 18th was gone. Someone had removed it from the files. Helen couldn't explain how. She locked the office every night. No one else had access. Security cameras. The motel didn't have any. Credit card records. He paid cash. Vehicle description? Helen hadn't noticed. She felt terrible. She wished she had paid more attention. Agent Lang showed Helen a series of photographs, various men connected to the case, including Eric Talmadge, Walter Briggs, and several other potential suspects. Helen studied each one carefully. She shook her head. None of them looked familiar. The man who checked in had been forgettable. Average height, average build. Maybe 30, maybe 40. Dark hair, she thought. Or possibly light brown. The kind of face you wouldn't remember 5 minutes after looking at it. The Crescent City lead added another layer to the mystery, but provided no answers. If the man Helen saw was connected to the twins' disappearance, he had vanished as completely as Kelsey and Morgan themselves. Autumn arrived. The investigation continued. Agent Lang refused to give up, even as the case grew colder. She reviewed evidence until her eyes burned. She interviewed witnesses until they stopped answering her call. She followed leads that went nowhere and theories that collapsed under scrutiny. In November 2005, Patricia Hartwell held a memorial service for her daughters at a church in Sacramento. Over 200 people attended. Friends from college, former teachers, co-workers. Eric Talmadge sat in the back row, sobbing quietly. Walter Briggs attended, guilt etched into every line of his weathered face, still blaming himself for renting the boat to the twins. Agent Lang watched from the side, studying faces, looking for anything suspicious. She saw only grief. Patricia stood at the podium and spoke about her girls, about the way they used to finish each other's sentences, about their laughter, about the dreams they would never fulfill. She looked directly at the gathered crowd and said something that Agent Lang would never forget. Someone knows what happened. Someone out there knows the truth. And I will not stop. I will not rest. I will not let my daughters be forgotten until that someone tells me why they took my girls from me. The church fell silent. Outside, rain began to fall, pattering against stained glass windows like whispered secrets. December brought the first anniversary of the Suitcase discovery approaching. News outlets ran retrospective pieces. True crime forums dissected every detail. The theories multiplied. Some people believed the twins had faked their deaths and fled to Alaska. Others thought a serial killer had targeted them. Still others blamed mechanical failure, pure tragic accident, and insisted the suitcase was unrelated coincidence. Agent Lang knew better. Nothing about this case was coincidence. Everything connected. She just couldn't see the pattern yet. Then, on December 9th, 2005, 18 months after the twins vanished, Agent Lang received a phone call that changed everything. It came from a correctional facility in Oregon. An inmate named Curtis Webb wanted to talk. He claimed he had information about the Hartwell twins. He claimed he knew who killed them. Curtis Webb was serving 15 years for armed robbery. He had no connection to the Hartwell case, no reason to know anything. But he insisted he would only speak to Agent Lang, in person, alone. Agent Lang drove to the prison the next morning. She sat across from Curtis Webb in a gray interview room that smelled like disinfectant and despair. Curtis was 41 years old, heavily tattooed, missing teeth. He looked exactly like what he was, a career criminal who had made bad choices his entire life. But when he started talking, Agent Lang felt her pulse quicken. Curtis said he had a cousin, a man named Paul Driscoll. Paul worked on fishing boats up and down the coast, Alaska to California, wherever work took him. Paul had problems, drinking problems, anger problems, woman problems. He had done things, bad things, things he sometimes bragged about when he got drunk. In August 2004, Curtis and Paul had gotten drunk together at a bar in Eureka, California. Paul was celebrating. He had just returned from a job in Alaska, made good money, felt invincible. After enough whiskey, he started talking, started saying things that made Curtis uncomfortable. Things about two girls on a boat. Things about an accident that wasn't an accident. Things about a suitcase he needed to get rid of. Curtis had been too drunk to remember the details clearly. He thought Paul was just talking, saying crazy things the way drunks do. But now, seeing the news coverage, seeing the photograph of those twins, Curtis couldn't stop thinking about it. What if Paul hadn't been lying? What if he had actually done something? Agent Lang leaned forward. Where was Paul Driscoll now? Curtis didn't know. They had lost touch. Paul moved around constantly, never stayed in one place long. Last Curtis heard, maybe 2 years ago, Paul was working on a fishing boat out of Dutch Harbor, Alaska. But that was old information. He could be anywhere. Why was Curtis telling her this now? Why not 18 months ago? Curtis looked down at his hands. He said he had been scared. Paul was dangerous. Curtis had a family, kids he never saw anymore but still loved. He didn't want Paul coming after them, but sitting in prison thinking about those two girls, their mother crying on television. Curtis couldn't live with staying silent anymore. Some sins were too heavy to carry. Agent Lang spent the next week verifying Curtis Webb's story. Paul Driscoll existed, 46 years old, extensive criminal record, assault, domestic violence, drunk and disorderly. He had worked on fishing vessels throughout his adult life, exactly as Curtis described. Employment record showed him working in Alaska and California during 2004. Most significantly, Paul Driscoll had been in Monterey in June 2004. He had worked a 3-week contract on a charter fishing boat operating out of Moss Landing Harbor, the same harbor where the Hartwell twins rented the driftwood. His contract ended June 16th, the day the twins took that Polaroid photograph. The day before they disappeared, Agent Lang obtained photographs of Paul Driscoll. She showed them to Helen Ortega in Crescent City. Helen studied the images for a long time. Then she looked up, eyes wide. "That's him. That's the man who checked into the motel with the black suitcase." A warrant went out for Paul Driscoll's arrest. FBI field offices across the country received his photograph. Alerts went to border crossings. Coast Guard vessels were notified. Every law enforcement agency on the West Coast joined the search. They never found him. Paul Driscoll had vanished as completely as the twins he allegedly murdered. Christmas 2005 came and went. Then New Year's. The investigation continued into 2006, but momentum slowed. Without Paul Driscoll in custody, without concrete evidence, the case remained frustratingly open. Theories existed. Suspicions pointed in clear directions. But theories and suspicions don't bring closure. They don't answer the questions that wake you at 3 in the morning. Agent Lang kept working. She tracked Paul's known associates, interviewed former co-workers, examined his financial records. She built a circumstantial case that painted a disturbing picture. Paul had been near the twins when they disappeared. He had acted suspiciously in the days following. He had been in Alaska when the suitcase washed ashore. He had a history of violence against women. But without a body, without witnesses, without Paul himself, justice remained elusive. In March 2006, almost 2 years after the twins vanished, Patricia Hartwell hired a psychic. Agent Lang tried to discourage her. Psychics didn't solve crimes. They preyed on desperate families and offered false hope. But Patricia had reached the end of rational options. She needed something, anything. The psychic's name was Madeline Cross. She held Kelsey's fleece jacket and Morgan's jeans, closed her eyes and spoke in a dreamy voice about water and darkness and a man with cruel hands. She said the twins were together. She said they weren't in pain anymore. She said they wanted their mother to know they loved her. Agent Lang watched from across the room, maintaining professional neutrality, while fighting the urge to throw Madeline Cross out of Patricia's house. This was exploitation. This was cruelty disguised as comfort. But then Madeline said something that made Agent Lang's blood freeze. She said she saw a boat. Not the driftwood. A bigger boat. Dark blue hull. The name started with M. She said she saw a man taking photographs. She said something went wrong. She said there was blood in the water. Agent Lang pulled Madeline aside after the session. How did she know about the larger boat in the background of the Polaroid? That detail had never been released to the public. How did she know about photographs being taken? Madeline claimed she simply knew. The spirits told her. She couldn't explain it logically. Agent Lang didn't believe in psychics, but she believed in following leads, no matter how strange. She spent the next month searching boat registrations for vessels with dark blue hulls and names starting with M that had been operating near Monterey Bay in June 2004. She found 17 possible matches. One of them, a 63-foot fishing vessel named Marauder, had been owned by a marine supply company and operated by various contract crews. Employment records showed Paul Driscoll had worked aboard the Marauder from May through mid-June 2004. The same boat visible in the background of the Polaroid. The same boat Paul Driscoll had access to. The same dark blue hull. Everything was connecting. The pattern was emerging. But Paul Driscoll remained missing, and without him the pattern meant nothing in a courtroom. Spring turned to summer. 2006 became 2007. The case stayed open but inactive. Agent Lang moved on to other investigations. Patricia Hartwell aged years in months, grief carving deep lines into her face. Eric Talmadge left Monterey, unable to live in a place haunted by memories of Morgan. The world kept turning because it had no choice. The ocean kept its secrets. And somewhere, maybe in Alaska, maybe in California, maybe in some remote place no one had thought to look, Paul Driscoll lived free while two families lived with permanent holes in their heart. That was where things stood, when everything changed again. When the second discovery happened. When the case that seemed destined to remain forever unsolved suddenly tore itself open in the most horrifying way imaginable. But that part of the story, the part that would finally reveal what happened aboard the Driftwood on that perfect June day in 2004, the part that would explain the suitcase and the Polaroid and the man with cruel hands, still waited in the future, still waited for someone to find what the ocean had hidden, still waited for the truth that would be somehow worse than any theory anyone had imagined. The call came on a Tuesday morning in August 2007, 3 years and 2 months after Kelsey and Morgan Hartwell disappeared into blue water. Agent Veronica Lang was in her office in San Francisco, reviewing case files on a completely unrelated human trafficking investigation, when her phone rang. The voice on the other end belonged to a Canadian park ranger named Prince Rupert, British Columbia. Graham had been conducting a routine patrol along a remote stretch of coastline when he stumbled across something that didn't belong. A cave, accessible only during extreme low tide, hidden behind rock formations that made it invisible from the water. Inside that cave, pushed back into the darkest recess where sunlight never reached, he had found human remains. 2 bodies, female, approximately same age, same height, same build. They had been there a long time, years based on deconsolidation. They were wrapped in heavy plastic sheeting and weighted down with anchor chains. Someone had gone to considerable effort to hide them where they would never be found. But the ocean has moods. Tides shift. Earthquakes change underwater topography. What stays hidden for years can suddenly become exposed. Graham had been walking a route he had walked dozens of times before, and this time the water had receded just far enough to reveal an opening he had never seen. Agent Lang was on a plane to British Columbia 6 hours later. The bodies were transported to Vancouver for forensic analysis. The process took weeks. Salt water and time had destroyed so much evidence. Soft tissue had degraded. Dental records became crucial. DNA testing, though complicated by environmental damage, remained possible. The forensic team worked with painstaking care, knowing these remains might finally answer questions that had haunted investigators for 3 years. In September 2007, the identification came back. Kelsey Marie Hartwell, Morgan Elizabeth Hartwell, ages 23, deceased approximately 3 years. Cause of death, drowning. But drowning with a complication. Both bodies showed evidence of blunt force trauma to the head. Both had been struck repeatedly with a heavy object before entering the water. This was not an accident. This was not a boating mishap or mechanical failure or tragic misfortune. This was murder. Brutal, premeditated, calculated murder. Someone had killed the Hartwell twins, weighted their bodies and hidden them in a cave 2,000 miles from where they disappeared. Agent Lang stood in the Vancouver medical examiner's office, staring at the forensic photographs, feeling rage and grief twist together in her chest. 3 years these girls had been lying in darkness while their mother wondered and grieved and hoped against hope they might somehow still be alive. 3 years while Paul Driscoll walked free. The forensic team found something else. Fibers, synthetic rope fibers embedded in the plastic sheeting wrapped around the bodies. The rope was marine grade, the kind used on fishing vessels. Chemical analysis identified traces of diesel fuel and fish oil. The bodies had been transported on a boat before being hidden in the cave. More evidence pointing to Paul Driscoll. More pieces falling into place. But still no Paul Driscoll. Agent Lang returned to the United States with renewed determination. She assembled her task force again, brought in fresh agents, started from the beginning. They would find Paul. They would track every movement he had made since June 2004. They would follow the evidence from Monterey Bay to British Columbia, and everywhere in between until the complete picture emerged. October 2007 brought another break. A woman named Diane Fletcher contacted the FBI field office in Seattle. She had been watching the news coverage about the bodies found in British Columbia. She recognized the artist rendering of what the victims looked like before death. She was almost certain she had seen those two women. Agent Lang drove to Seattle to interview Diane personally. Diane worked as a bartender at a marina restaurant in Bellingham, Washington, just south of the Canadian border. In June 2004, she had been working at a different marina restaurant in Neah Bay, on the Olympic Peninsula. She remembered the Hartwell twins because they had come into the restaurant on June 17th, late afternoon, around 4 o'clock. Agent Lang's heart started pounding. June 17th, the day the twins disappeared. But the last confirmed sighting had been 9 in the morning in Monterey Bay, 300 miles south. How could they have been in Washington by 4 in the afternoon? Diane was certain. She remembered because the twins had seemed upset. They sat at the bar, ordered coffee, looked exhausted and scared. The one in the blue shirt, Diane thought her name might have been Kelsey based on the news reports, kept looking at the door like she expected someone to walk in. The other sister, Morgan, probably had a bruise on her cheek, fresh, dark purple. Diane had asked if they were okay, if they needed help. Morgan said they were fine, just tired from traveling, but her hands shook when she lifted her coffee cup. They stayed about 30 minutes, barely spoke, then left. Diane watched them walk down the dock toward the boats. She never saw them again. Why hadn't Diane reported this 3 years ago, when the twins first went missing? She explained that she hadn't connected them to the disappearance. The missing persons report said the twins vanished off California. Diane was in Washington. She assumed they were different women. It wasn't until seeing the reconstruction images on television, seeing the specific details about the sailing trip and the timeline, that Diane realized what she had witnessed. Agent Lang showed Diane photographs of various boats, including the Marauder. Diane studied them carefully. Then she pointed to the Marauder. Yes, that boat had been docked at Neah Bay on June 17th. She remembered because it was larger than most vessels that stopped there. The name started with M. Dark blue hull. She had noticed it because one of the line cooks made a joke about marauders invading their quiet marina. Everything was coming together. The theory that had been building in Agent Lang's mind for 3 years suddenly solidified into horrifying clarity. Paul Driscoll hadn't encountered the twins by accident on the open ocean near Monterey Bay. He had targeted them. He had followed them. He had intercepted them somehow and forced them aboard the Marauder. He had transported them north, up the coast, keeping them alive for hours or possibly days. He had taken them to British Columbia, killed them, hidden their bodies, then continued north to Alaska, where he dumped the suitcase, either as misdirection or because he... But why? What was the motive? Paul had no known connection to Kelsey or Morgan before June 2004. Why would a fishing boat worker with a criminal record target 2 college graduates enjoying a sailing trip? Agent Lang dug deeper into Paul's background. She interviewed everyone who had ever known him. She searched through his past like an archaeologist excavating bones. What she found painted a picture of a deeply disturbed man. Paul Driscoll had a twin sister. Her name was Rebecca. She had drowned in a boating accident in 1991, when both siblings were 30 years old. Rebecca and Paul had been close, unhealthily close according to family members who spoke reluctantly about things they preferred to forget. After Rebecca's death, Paul spiraled. His drinking worsened, his violence escalated. He became obsessed with twins. He would stare at twin children in public. He collected newspaper clippings about twins. He once got arrested for following a set of twin teenage girls through a shopping mall. The psychological profile emerged. Paul saw Kelsey and Morgan, and something broke inside his already fractured mind. They reminded him of Rebecca. They represented something he had lost. In his twisted thinking, taking them, controlling them, ultimately killing them, gave him some kind of closure or revenge against fate for stealing his sister. Agent Lang presented this theory to forensic psychologists. They agreed it fit the pattern. Paul was a classic example of someone who had experienced traumatic loss and channeled his grief into violent obsession. The twins had been surrogates, objects onto which he projected his unresolved anguish. But theory and profile still didn't locate Paul Driscoll. The manhunt intensified. His photograph appeared on America's Most Wanted. Crime Stoppers offered a $50,000 reward. Tips flooded in from across the country. Everyone led nowhere. November 2007. Patricia Hartwell traveled to British Columbia to claim her daughter's remains. She stood in the rain outside the facility where they had been kept, umbrella forgotten in her hand, water streaming down her face mixing with tears. Agent Lang stood beside her, feeling helpless. They had found the girls, they knew who killed them, but justice remained frustratingly out of reach. Patricia spoke quietly. "He's dead, isn't he, Paul? He's dead, and we will never know the whole truth." Agent Lang wanted to disagree, wanted to promise they would find him alive, wanted to offer hope. But she had been investigating long enough to recognize when someone was probably right. Paul Driscoll had vanished completely. No financial activity, no employment records, no sightings that checked out. Men like Paul, career criminals who lived on the margins, could disappear easily. They knew how to avoid detection, and sometimes they ended up dead in ways that ensured they were never identified. December came. Patricia held a second memorial service, this time with actual bodies to bury. The twins were laid to rest in Sacramento, side by side, matching headstones. The service was smaller than the first, only close family and friends. Eric Talmadge did not attend. He had moved to Maine, trying to build a life separate from the tragedy that had consumed 3 years of his existence. Agent Lang attended. She stood in the back, watching Patricia say goodbye to her daughters for the final time. The case would remain open. She would never stop looking for Paul Driscoll. But standing in that cemetery, surrounded by grief thick enough to choke on, she felt the weight of failure. They had answers, but not justice. They knew what happened, but not why, not really. The complete story had died with Paul, if Paul was indeed dead. All that remained were fragments and theories, and 2 young women in the ground, who should have had full lives ahead of them. The year 2008 arrived. Agent Lang transferred to a position in Washington, D.C., promoted, but emotionally exhausted. The Hartwell case stayed with her like a scar. She kept the file in her office, kept checking for updates, kept hoping for the break that would finally bring closure. January turned to February. Winter storms battered the Pacific coast. The ocean churned dark and angry, waves reaching heights that shut down shipping routes and sent boats scrambling for harbor. On February 23rd, a commercial fishing vessel named Northern Star was battling through rough seas off the coast of Sitka, Alaska, when something collided with their hull. The crew thought they had hit a log or debris. It happened sometimes. They prepared to assess damage, but when they looked over the side, they found something else. A body, male, floating face down, tangled in fishing net and rope. The captain radioed the Coast Guard. The body was recovered and transported to Sitka. Identification proved difficult. The man had been in the water for a considerable time, months, possibly longer. Fish and decomposition had destroyed facial features, but he had distinctive tattoos: an anchor on his left forearm, a mermaid on his right shoulder, a twin nautical star on his chest. The Alaska State Troopers ran the tattoo descriptions through their database. They got a match. Paul Driscoll, missing for 3 years, wanted for double homicide, dead in the water that had been his workplace and his escape route. Agent Lang received the call on a Friday evening. She stood in her kitchen, phone pressed to her ear, listening as the Alaska trooper explained what they had found. Paul Driscoll was dead, had been dead for quite some time based on forensic estimates. Cause of death appeared to be drowning, though determining exact circumstances was impossible given the condition of the trooper asked if Agent Lang wanted them to continue investigating. Was there any point in trying to determine how Paul ended up in the ocean? Agent Lang thought about it. She thought about Kelsey and Morgan. She thought about 3 years of searching and hoping, and pursuing a ghost. "No," she said finally. "Close it. He's dead. That's enough." The official report listed Paul Driscoll's death as accidental drowning, approximate time of death sometime in late 2005 or early 2006. He had been dead most likely for over 2 years before his body was discovered. Maybe he had fallen overboard drunk. Maybe he had killed himself, unable to live with what he had done. Maybe someone had thrown him overboard, frontier justice dealt by someone who learned what he had done to those twins. The ocean kept that secret along with all the others. In March 2008, Agent Lang flew to Sacramento to meet with Patricia Hartwell one final time. She brought closure in the form of official reports and confirmation that Paul Driscoll would never hurt anyone again. She expected relief. She expected some kind of peace. What she found was a woman hollowed out by grief, who had aged a decade in 4 years, sitting in a house full of photographs of daughters who would never grow older than 23. Patricia thanked Agent Lang for everything she had done. She said she appreciated the answers, but her voice was flat, empty. "Does it help?" Agent Lang asked quietly. "Knowing what happened? Knowing he's dead?" Patricia was silent for a long time. Then she shook her head. "Nothing helps. Nothing brings them back. I know how they died now. I know who killed them. But I still wake up every morning and they are still gone. That never changes." Agent Lang had no response to that, no comfort to offer, because Patricia was right. Justice, when it finally came, was cold comfort. The truth, when it finally emerged, changed nothing fundamental. 2 young women were still dead. A mother still grieved. Time still moved forward, indifferent to suffering. Before Agent Lang left Sacramento that day, Patricia gave her something. A photograph, the Polaroid that had been found in the suitcase. The image of Kelsey and Morgan on the driftwood, smiling, arms around each other, blue sky and water behind them. The last moment anyone captured them alive and happy and unaware of what was coming. "Keep it," Patricia said. "Remember them like that, not the way they ended, the way they were." Agent Lang took the photograph. She carried it back to Washington, D.C. She put it in her desk drawer, unable to look at it but unable to throw it away. Those smiling faces haunted her dreams. The official case file closed in April 2008. The FBI issued a final report. The Hartwell twins had been abducted and murdered by Paul Driscoll on June 17, 2004. Their bodies had been recovered in British Columbia in August 2007. Their killer had died before facing trial. Justice, such as it was, had been served. But cases are never really closed, Agent Lang learned. They just stop being active. They become files in archives, memories in minds, scars that never fully heal. The story should have ended there, with Paul Driscoll dead, with twins buried, the investigation concluded. Most cases would have ended there. But the Hartwell case had one more secret to reveal. One final twist that would reopen everything and force Agent Lang to question every assumption she had made. It came in September 2009, more than 5 years after the twins disappeared. A woman named Jennifer Walsh walked into the FBI field office in Portland, Oregon, and asked to speak with someone about the Hartwell murder case. The agent on duty tried to explain the case was closed. The killer was dead. There was nothing more to investigate, Jennifer insisted. She had information, important information, information that would change everything. They gave her to a junior agent who listened with growing disbelief as Jennifer told her story. Jennifer had been married to Paul Driscoll's cousin, a man named Frank Walsh. Frank and Paul had been close. They worked fishing boats together for years. Frank had died in a car accident in July 2009. While cleaning out his belongings, Jennifer found a box hidden in their garage. Inside that box were things that made her blood run cold. Photographs. Dozens of photographs. Some were of Kelsey and Morgan Hartwell, taken aboard the Marauder. Images showing them bound and terrified. Images Jennifer could barely look at because they documented suffering and fear and the last hours of 2 innocent lives. But other photographs showed different women. At least 4 other sets of twins, all young, all blonde. all looking terrible. Jennifer had spent weeks trying to decide what to do. Part of her wanted to burn the box and forget she ever found it. Part of her felt loyalty to Frank, to the memory of their marriage. But the faces in those photographs wouldn't let her rest. Those were real women, someone's daughters, someone's sisters. They deserved to have their stories told. The junior agent immediately escalated to senior investigators. Within hours, the box was in an evidence locker and Agent Veronica Lang was on a plane back to Portland. She examined every photograph with growing horror. Jennifer Walsh was right. Paul Driscoll hadn't just killed Kelsey and Morgan Hartwell. They weren't his only victims. The FBI launched a massive investigation. They identified 3 of the 4 sets of twins in the photographs. All had gone missing between 1995 and 2003. All disappeared near coastal areas. All cases had been classified as accidents or unsolved missing persons. None had been connected until now. The photographs proved Paul Driscoll was a serial killer. His obsession with twins had driven him to hunt them for over a decade. Kelsey and Morgan were simply the last. The ones he got caught for because of a suitcase that washed ashore, and a Polaroid that survived salt water, and a cousin who couldn't keep quiet in prison. How many others were there? How many twins had Paul killed that never made it into Frank Walsh's hidden collection? The FBI searched for years, following every lead, checking every missing persons case. They identified 2 more possible victims. Maybe more existed. Maybe the ocean had swallowed their stories completely. Agent Lang stood in her office in Washington, D.C., surrounded by photographs of young women who had trusted the wrong person on the wrong day. She thought about how close the Hartwell case had come to remaining unsolved forever. If the suitcase hadn't washed ashore, if Curtis Webb hadn't called from prison, if Graham McAllister hadn't walked that remote coastline during extreme low tide, if Jennifer Walsh hadn't found Frank's hidden box, any one of those chances going differently, and Kelsey and Morgan would have joined the statistics of people who simply vanish. She called Patricia Hartwell to tell her what they had discovered, that her daughter's deaths were part of something larger and more horrible than anyone had imagined. Patricia listened in silence. Then she asked the question Agent Lang had been dreading. How many? We think at least 8 victims, maybe more. We will probably never know the exact number. Patricia's voice came through the phone line, flat and distant. My girls weren't even special to him. They were just more bodies, just part of a pattern.
Agent Lang wanted to disagree, wanted to say something comforting, wanted to offer some perspective that would make the horror less overwhelming. But she had nothing. Patricia was right. To Paul Driscoll, Kelsey and Morgan had been objects, symbols of his dead sister, part of a compulsion he couldn't control and didn't want to stop. The FBI held a press conference in October 2009. They announced that Paul Driscoll had been a serial killer responsible for multiple murders across the Pacific coast. They released photographs, asked for public help identifying remaining victims, urged anyone with information to come forward. The case that had seemed closed ripped open again, wider and darker than before. Families of the other victims contacted the FBI. Parents who had spent years wondering what happened to their daughters suddenly had answers they never wanted. The truth provided no comfort. Knowing was somehow worse than not knowing because it confirmed the nightmares they had been trying to avoid imagining. Agent Lang spent the next year working to close all the connected cases. She traveled up and down the coast, interviewing witnesses, examining old evidence with new understanding, building a comprehensive picture of Paul Driscoll's decade-long killing spree. It consumed her life. She stopped sleeping properly. She stopped eating regularly. Her supervisor ordered her to take time off. She refused. In November 2010, 6 years after the Hartwell twins disappeared, Agent Lang finally closed the last connected case. 8 confirmed victims, all twins, all killed by Paul Driscoll between 1995 and 2004, all hidden in remote locations where they might never have been found. The ocean had been his dumping ground. The vastness of the Pacific coast had been his shield. Agent Lang wrote her final report and submitted it to her supervisors. Then she went home to her empty apartment, poured herself a drink, and allowed herself to finally break down. She cried for Kelsey and Morgan. She cried for all the other victims whose names she now knew by heart. She cried for Patricia Hartwell and all the other mothers who had lost their daughters to a monster. She cried until she had nothing left. The Hartwell case officially closed again in January 2011. This time, Agent Lang believed it would stay closed. All victims identified, all evidence processed, all questions answered as completely as they ever would be. She kept the Polaroid in her desk drawer. She looked at it sometimes when cases got difficult, when she needed to remember why she did this job. Kelsey and Morgan smiled at her from that frozen moment in time, unaware that behind them, barely visible on the horizon, death was approaching in the form of a dark blue boat named Marauder. Years passed. Agent Lang retired in 2015. She moved to Montana, far from the ocean, far from memories of bodies hidden in caves and suitcases washing ashore. She tried to build a quiet life. She tried to forget, but some cases never let go. Some faces never stop haunting dreams. On the anniversary of the twins' disappearance, June 17th, Agent Lang would find herself thinking about that perfect day in 2004. The blue sky, the calm water, the way two sisters had set out for an adventure and sailed straight into nightmare. She wondered sometimes if they had screamed, if they had fought, if they had known at the end that they were going to die. She wondered if Paul Driscoll had said anything to them or if he had been silent as he wrapped their bodies in plastic and weighted them down with chains. She wondered if he had felt anything at all or if the compulsion had burned out every human emotion except the need to take and destroy. The ocean kept those secrets. And Agent Lang learned to live with the silence. Patricia Hartwell died in 2018, 14 years after losing her daughters. Heart attack, the death certificate said. But Agent Lang knew better. Patricia had died of grief, slowly, over many years. The moment her daughters vanished, something vital inside Patricia had started shutting down, and it just took 14 years for her body to catch up. Agent Lang attended the funeral. It was small. Patricia had outlived most of her friends. The twins' father, divorced from Patricia years before the girls disappeared, had died in 2012. Eric Talmadge sent flowers but didn't attend. The service was quiet and sad and felt like the final chapter finally closing on a story that had gone on far too long. They buried Patricia between her daughters, 3 graves in a row, 3 lives destroyed by one man's sickness. Agent Lang stood in the Sacramento cemetery and watched dirt fall on Patricia's coffin and felt the weight of how little justice actually mattered in the face of loss this profound. The Hartwell case files were archived in 2019, 15 years after the initial disappearance. They went into storage with thousands of other solved cases, organized, labeled, forgotten by everyone except the people who had lived through them. But the story doesn't really end. Stories like this never end. They echo forward through time, touching lives in ways small and large. True crime podcasters tell the tale to millions of listeners. Television documentaries recreate events with actors and dramatic music. Internet forums dissect every detail, arguing theories and what-ifs. Kelsey and Morgan Hartwell became famous in death in ways they never were in life. Their smiling faces from that Polaroid became icons of innocence destroyed. Their story became a cautionary tale. Parents tell daughters about being careful, about trusting instincts, about how danger can look like just another boat on a sunny day. The ocean still holds secrets, other bodies in other caves, other victims of other monsters. The Pacific stretches vast and deep and cold, indifferent to human suffering, swallowing stories, and occasionally, when tides shift and circumstances align, whispering fragments back to shore. Sometimes Agent Lang stands on her porch in Montana, 1,000 miles from any ocean, and she swears she can smell salt water. She closes her eyes and sees 2 blonde girls smiling on a boat, arms around each other, unaware that behind them death is approaching. She opens her eyes and they are gone, dissolved into memory and time. The Hartwell twins vanished on June 17th, 2004. Their suitcase washed ashore in Alaska 10 months later. Their bodies were found in British Columbia 3 years after that. Their killer died in the ocean that had been his hunting ground. Justice, incomplete and unsatisfying, eventually came. But Kelsey and Morgan Hartwell are still gone. Still 23 forever. Still frozen in that Polaroid moment, smiling and alive and unknowing. The ocean took them. The ocean kept them. And the ocean, in its own time and way, finally gave them back. That's the only ending this story has. The only ending any of the families got. Not closure, not peace, just the cold fact of death and the impossible task of continuing to live afterward. Agent Veronica Lang keeps the Polaroid in a box now, along with other mementos from her career. She doesn't look at it anymore. She doesn't need to. She has memorized every detail. The angle of sunlight, the curve of smiles, the blue infinity of water and sky, the dark shape on the horizon that she knows now was the Marauder, carrying Paul Driscoll toward two young women who never had a chance. Some nights, when sleep won't come, she thinks about the moment Paul intercepted the driftwood. How did he get them aboard his boat? What did he say? What threats did he make? Did Kelsey and Morgan believe initially that he was helping them? Did they realize the truth gradually or all at once? Those questions have no answers. Paul Driscoll took them to his grave at the bottom of the Pacific. The twins took their final moments to graves in Sacramento. All that remains are the facts, cold and insufficient, and the echo of a story that once you hear it, you can never completely forget. The Hartwell case is closed, has been for years, will remain closed forever. But somewhere in a Montana retirement, a former FBI agent still wakes in the middle of the night, thinking about two sisters who went sailing on a perfect June day and never came home. Still wonders if she could have worked faster, found Paul sooner, saved someone. The ocean doesn't answer. It just keeps moving, waves rolling in endless rhythm, carrying secrets down to darkness where light never reaches and truth dissolves into silence. And that finally is where this story ends. Not with resolution or redemption or any kind of meaning, just with the fact of it. Two young women dead, a mother grieved to death, a killer drowned, and the rest of us left behind to wonder and remember and try, somehow, to keep living in a world where monsters exist and sometimes they win. The end comes not with closure but with acceptance. This is what happened. This is all we will ever know. These are the pieces the ocean gave back. The rest stays hidden forever. Kelsey Marie Hartwell, Morgan Elizabeth Hartwell, 23 years old, disappeared June 17, 2004, found August 2007, murdered by Paul Driscoll, case closed January 2011. That's the official record. The documented truth, the story as it exists in archives and reports, but the real story, the human story, goes on in the hearts of people who loved them, in the memory of a mother who couldn't survive their loss, in the nightmares of an investigator who never quite solved it fast enough, in the cautionary tale told to keep other daughters safe. The ocean keeps everything else, and the ocean never tells.